Hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. Sorry. I'm really, really sorry, everyone, but I really screwed this up. I forgot to turn on the audio. Sorry. So, no, you guys have, but on my chat, nobody can hear us. So, my bad. Oh my gosh. So, I'm embarrassed. Anyway, let's take it from the top. Hello, comrades. I hope you can hear us now. I'm gonna have to go through that whole thing again. Wow. Oh well, at least now I've had a quick dress rehearsal or two. Um, Hello. Welcome everyone to A World to Win, my channel here on YouTube, where I talk about history and politics and current events from a Marxist-Leninist perspective. Uh, and this is our ongoing study series on the German Revolution by Pierre Broué. We've taken about a 2-month break, so we're coming back in this pretty hard and fast right now. And before we got rolling, I just had a statement that I wanted to read that is really important for our current moment. So before I let everyone introduce themselves and get this rolling, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the incredible and revolutionary moment that we are currently experiencing. Across the nation and in cities across the world, there has been an outpouring of mass protest and revolt in response to the horrific, racist murder of George Floyd by police in Minneapolis. As socialists, as revolutionaries, we stand unequivocally in solidarity with this movement in defense of Black lives against state terror. We recognize that state terror against Black and Brown people in this country is not simply a product of the system, it is its core function. The systematic killing of Black people by the police is a moral outrage, and it will not stop until the police institutions are fundamentally dismantled, not simply defunded or reformed or replaced by so-called community policing. The racist death machine that is American capitalism cannot be defeated without the total removal of its fascist shock troops. Abolish the police, abolish ICE, abolish the CIA. From Portland to Minneapolis, Black Lives Matter. From New York to Paris, Black Lives Matter. To the whole world over, Black Lives Matter. While this may seem tangential to our discussion of the German Revolution, I promise that nothing could be more relevant. It is a grave warning of what may happen if we fail in our revolutionary tasks. The defeat of a revolution means not only the death of individual revolutionaries, but a descent into the nightmare of all-encompassing state terror, which we call fascism. Friedrich Engels wrote, "Bourgeois society stands at a crossroads, either transition to socialism or regression into barbarism." And so stands our choice today. On the one hand, we have a revolutionary movement led by the most oppressed elements of our society, which stands as the front line against this decrepit, racist system of American capitalism. On the other hand, we have the venal defenders of the old ways, the ones who echo the Nazi slogan Deutschland über alles in their reactionary calls to make America great again, the ones who shoot up Black churches, stab Muslim women on the light rail, and who are increasingly given sanction by the state for their murderous acts. I will close this statement by imploring us to attend with our absolute attention to this revolutionary moment, not to simply bear witness as the pseudo-woke liberal politicians to tell us to protest peacefully and vote blue no matter who. Fuck that. Our cities are on fire right now with righteous anger at the violence which abuses Black and Brown people every single day in this racist system. Get out there. If you're not in a revolutionary organization yet, join one. If there aren't any in your area, make one yourself. Black Lives Matter, Black trans lives matter. Abolish the police, abolish ICE, down with capitalism and the United States once and for fucking all. All right. now, now I'm going to let my co-hosts introduce themselves. I have a very special guest today. Trekkie69 is joining us to summarize one of our chapters. Trekkie, can you go ahead and introduce yourself now? Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to have you. We're always happy to take on new guests. This is an important part of our kind of pedagogical practice here is that, we're learning collectively. None of us are experts really, you know, and we're trying to kind of model this practice that anyone, oh shit, god damn it, god damn it. Yeah, everyone on the call can hear, but apparently the folks at home can't hear. Oopsie daisy. Oh shit. Я тоже, товарищ. uh, oh my. All right, I'm trying to get the screen set up right here too. Oh shit. Oh, so hold on. Zahn is saying that they can't hear the chat or you guys at all. I'm gonna see what's going on here. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with that, unfortunately. Uh, uh, oh, that's really annoying. Ah! Um, yeah, I think I'm actually the only non-wobbly here. Fuck. All right. Uh, I think that should do it. Maybe. I'm trying things. Sorry, guys. Keep talking. Chat, if you can tell us if we're finally getting my audio here. Sorry. Uh,
They haven't updated the red card website because it's still kind of confusing with that.
Extremely confusing, isn't it?
Yeah.
oh my gosh.
By the way, for those who don't know, yesterday was the 115th anniversary of the founding Congress of the Industrial Workers of the World. Which was held in Chicago. And for those who, especially on my stream, didn't know, the IWW were, at least at the beginning, at least observer members of the Comintern. So that's pretty based.
I think they can hear us now.
Yeah, they can, but now you're coming out of my speakers as well as my headphones.
God damn it.
Hey, we're all prim now. I'm prim now.
Okay.
Hey, if you're so prim, then why are you using language?
I wear glasses too.
Technology strikes again.
And take a lot of medication.
Oh yeah, I'm the opposite of a narco-primitivist. I want automation work. Oh shit, Melody,
Yeah, what's
your
up?
tech issues are driving Kyle to drink.
Oh no.
That's just life. I live in Florida. Like 9,000 people are getting coronavirus every single day. That's what's doing it.
Oh,
Is Florida the new like epicenter?
It's really bad. It's
Yeah, I've
really
been hearing that like Florida's pretty bad now, and like New York surprisingly isn't so bad or something.
yeah. Florida and Texas are both having crazy spikes right now. We know someone in my building has it.
Word.
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
that sucks.
Yes.
My mom had it and she got over it.
Sorry, guys.
Latine person, and fuck those people. We'll just put them in jail and never give them a trial ever.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah, fun.
That's awful.
Yeah.
Yeah, fun country you got there. It would be a shame if a global pandemic ever happened to it. It would be a shame if anything happened to neoliberal capitalism, man. Is there any sort of push to talk feature? Oh,
As always. Yeah.
Sure.
I'm
Sure,
fine
yeah.
with that.
Sounds good. All right, intermission time.
All right.
See you in a minute.
Sorry, everyone. We're doing our best, I swear. Alright, hopefully we're gonna start a Discord call here. Oh man, I don't know how to work this either. God dang it. Alright, start talking, Trekkie. Let's see if I can... Can you talk so I can see if I can hear you? Yes, good, I can... Oh. Okay. No, we're done with Skype, sorry. Now how do I add other people to the call? Fuck. Uh, oh Christ. I'm so sorry, everyone. That's a pain. I'm so sorry. Yeah, I'm really sorry. I don't know what's going on here. I have lost my ability to deal with this. Settings, audio, how do I do this? Audio, desktop audio on. Done. Okay, can you try talking now? See if that works. uh, fuck this. Sorry. Hello, Victoria. I'm doing my best here. We're having some technical difficulties. Sorry, everyone. Bear with us, everyone. Sorry. We're working on it. All right, we got everyone in the Discord chat here. I'm so sorry. Hello. All right. All right. Now I'm not having silly audio issues on my computer. I'm gonna try adding microphone check. Speakers. Let's try that. Is that working? No, that's not working either. Fuck. Chat, let me know if if you start hearing my co-hosts here. Ugh. No. There's some silly thing going on with my... Yeah, see... Yeah, no, this is, I think, all happening on my end, which is really, really annoying. Because I've never had this problem with audio on Streamlabs before. It's not... Okay. No, it's not you. I'm 99% sure this is on my end. Okay. Trying that? No. It's not doing anything either. Ay. Mm. Okay. Trying a couple more things. I'm really starting to lose my patience here, though. Fuck. Oh, yes. Lots of stuff, lots of reading, lots of stuff going on the ground. Nothing I want to advertise here, though. Yeah. Oh, well, you do what you can. Getting really, really sick of this. Speakers. I am... Huh.
Riots in the crowd. We're using Jody Dean's Krausen party.
But like, I haven't really been reading books for about the last month.
Okay, I think I have it.
Sometimes you just... Yay!
Hey, chat, let me know. Can you hear my co-hosts now? Guys,
Oh,
keep
I
talking.
think I
Can you
muted
hear
you on
us,
my end
dude?
by accident, Melody.
We're
Oh,
talking.
okay.
We're
I've
here.
never had this much
I'm the
difficulty with
Can you
Good
hear me?
hey,
Chat.
chat, can you let me know if you can hear me?
I can hear you, so my
And
chat can hear
and
me.
as well.
Sure. Yay, Brianna says my chat can hear
Yes.
everyone. So sorry
Nice.
about that, everyone. That was an ordeal. So yeah, let's go ahead and I'm sorry this is taken so much. But let's everyone go ahead and Trekkie, I'm so sorry. This is the third time I've asked you to do this, but my channel actually hasn't heard you introduce yourself yet. So, just real quick, name, pronouns, projects, and why you think it's important to study the German Revolution.
Name Trekkie69, pronouns they them. Little introduction. Non-binary, neurodivergent, Jewish, anarchist person. I'm a history grad student, study a history of anarchism specifically. And I do a chits channel where I talk about all the isms that I, have to deal with and shit. Also theory and history and fun stuff. And I hope that I'm famous for my very amazing wig collection, of which this is a one, but I don't know, that's up to everyone here, I guess. You can find me at twitch.tv/Trekkie69. And for at the very least the next month, I will be streaming every day at 1 p.m. Eastern.
All right. Kyle or Simba, you want to give it a shot?
Simba,
Oh
go
wait,
for it.
shit! I need. Why do I think the German Revolution is important? I
Yes,
think it's
please.
important because we can learn a lot from it. I think one of the things that we learned is that if the socialist movement is divided over, I mean, pretty much anything, it is very much at fracture. But also, I think the most important thing we can extract from it is the fact that social democracy is the literal death of revolution.
Yes, well put.
Cool.
That seems to be the common lesson here.
Facts. I'm Simba, they, them. You can find me on YouTube and Twitter at Young Simba. And I think, did I say pronouns? They, them, if I didn't. And I think that the German Revolution is really important to kind of piggyback off of what Trekkie said and what Mel, very likely believes as well. The German Revolution, had it succeeded, which it didn't, spoiler alert, sorry, now you don't have to read the book, I guess, which it didn't. Marxism would look completely different. Socialism in the 20th century would look completely different. It would have started in, a very advanced country, or at least moved to a very advanced country. And the failure of the revolution wasn't just the failure of socialism, it was also the failure of liberalism and liberal democracy. We have to remember that after the fall of the Weimar Republic, the constitution that came after that is the same constitution that allowed Hitler to, be chancellor without ever being elected. So this is massively important for those reasons.
Yes, I want to echo all of that before I forget to, by the way, because I completely agree with that statement as well. Hi, my name is Kyle. I go by Labor Kyle on the internet. I have a YouTube channel where I like to talk about video games and theory broadly, which can be Marxist theory, which can be critical theory, which can be post-structuralism, which can be whatever. The iterations of 20th century continental philosophy you choose. I like that kind of a thing. I'm an academic who studies history. I studied the depictions of antiquity, ancient Rome in contemporary Italy. So fasci statues and that kind of a thing, public history, that sort of a thing. I really love it. It's a great topic. and my pronouns are he, him, and I think studying the German Revolution is important for all of the reasons that my co-hosts said before. I completely agree with and endorse them, and also find it to be a compelling place to where we can learn how history is written, forgotten, and remembered in various ways. That to have a left wing of an event that's centered on the left have such a great deal of use for looking at history more broadly, I think is very exciting and important, and I think it's in general understudied. And that's it.
Oh, that's
Courtesy.
excellent. So since it's been like almost 2 months since we had our last session, which is fine, it's good to take breaks, and there's been a lot going on lately, so uh, perhaps more important things than making YouTube videos. No offense to anybody in present company. But uh, so it might be worth it for our audience to kind of summarize where we left off last time. So we left off, I think, in the kind of the wake of the March action in March of 1921, which is a kind of a semi-insurrection that's headed by the KPD, the Communist Party, uh, and summary, it goes very badly. Um, they're very much kind of alone and isolated in it, and a lot of their top brass ends up in prison because of it, including Brandler and a couple of others who are like really central to the party. And it's absolutely catastrophic for the party because they end up losing 2/3 of their membership after March. Their membership drops precipitously, and they are really discredited in the eyes of a lot of working class people, which is saying something because the KPD actually had a very strong working class base, as we'll explore in today's summaries. Um, the KPD is basically spending most of 1921 and 1922 kind of rebuilding themselves after the catastrophe of the March action. Uh, and they're doing so, they're having a lot of tension, and they're, uh, you know, potentially splitting into different factions and stuff, but uh, with the intervention of Moscow, specifically from Lenin, they're able to kind of hold themselves together, if tenuously. Um, Basically, the party is. It's hard to say that they're like really thriving, but they're having a pretty um, like an observable recovery after the events of March. Um, and let's see. Uh, yeah, and this was greatly undermined when the Social Democratic Party's newspaper Vorwärts revealed by leaking a bunch of documents that were confiscated from KPD activists when they tried to cross the border into Russia. I think sometime in June, uh, it was revealed that the March action had been like really like it was basically kind of planned uh, to be even more ridiculous and over the top and adventuristic than it actually ended up being, including like plots to like do fake kidnappings and assassinations and that kind of thing. And yeah, so the leadership who, even though this is published by the SPD, it's widely regarded as credible because the documents are authentic. So even among like actual party members, I think this happens in kind of mid 1921, and it causes quite a scandal in the party. And everyone's pissed, and Paul Levy, who is had kind of warned against the March action before it happened, and was kind of shouted down as basically like a yellow, soft-bellied, whatever, petty bourgeois, whatever you want to call him, Menshevik. And it turned out that everything he had said about the March action was actually right. And he's really salty about it, and he never really stops being salty about it, as we'll talk about later. And so I think with that we can I think that's a pretty good summary of where we left off last time in late April. Kyle is going to go ahead and summarize chapter 30 for us. Izzy, our other regular co-host, couldn't be with us today, so I'm going to be covering chapters 31 and 32, and then Simba is going to pick up with chapter 33, and Trekkie is going to close us out with chapter 34, and then we will have some time to just have some discussion, and we, of course, welcome you in the chat to submit your thoughts and reactions to what we're talking about. This is really what we're aiming for in our study group style, which is to be very open, and there are no stupid questions. Please ask as many questions as you want, no matter how basic you think they are. We'll try, again, we're not experts, but we'll try to answer them the best we can with the knowledge that we have. And if there's something that we don't know, we'll say we don't know, and we'll try to look it up and create an engaged learning environment here. So without further ado, I'm going to pass things off to Kyle. Are you ready, Kyle?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, go for it.
Are people having difficulty hearing my microphone? Bree had mentioned. Is my microphone sounding glitchy to anybody in chat?
It is. It actually, I can hear that too. It's a little. It seems to be dragging a little bit. Like.
Sorry, one sec.
It's all good, comrade.
Yeah, this is, believe it or not, folks, the not the worst technical difficulties we've had on this channel, on this show. There was one session we had where I absentmindedly forgot to plug in my laptop, and it shut down. So yeah, we're gonna get back into it here.
Hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, so yeah, I apologize that there's some crackling going on. I don't know what to do about that.
Definitely a lot of crackling.
Okay, then then, or should I continue?
Let's just do our best. I think it'll be okay.
Yeah, let's just go on with it.
So continue, summarize?
Yeah.
Indeed.
On with the show.
Okay,
On with the show.
I'll try and get through it quick, I promise. So chapter 30 focuses on what Broué entitles the chapter. It's the Rapallo turn. By this, he's discussing the context and changes that occurred around and during the signing of the Treaty of Rapallo. It's an agreement that was signed between the German Republic and the Soviet Union. I'll get into more details about it in a second, but a little background will be helpful here. So after World War I, there was a summit in Paris in 1919 where the Allied powers signed what they called the Treaty of Versailles. What this did is, to really sum it up, is basically it placed a lot of the responsibility for the conflict in World War I onto Germany. It reduced their territorial holdings, including their colonial holdings, by something around 20%, I think. And then it called for Germany to start paying huge monetary reparations for what happened during the war and to dismantle their military. So the Treaty of Versailles is essentially a lot of the jumping off point for this. It's good context. Because all of this, it put the German Republic into a very precarious position in terms of their economy. And German military officials and bureaucrats of all kinds were trying to determine whether that they should align themselves with what they called the Entente, which was this informal, not like treaty, not on a treaty necessarily, but an understood alliance between the British, the French, and before the Bolshevik Revolution, the Russian Empire. And that persisted throughout the war. Eventually, the Russian component, because of the Bolshevik Revolution, was complicated and then negated. But so they were trying to determine whether or not they were going to align themselves with the Soviet Union, and the results that was the result eventually. Elements of both the German left and the German right, a lot of liberals, the German bourgeoisie, saw an alignment with the Bolsheviks as advantageous for themselves, considering the precarious economic conditions that they were in after the war, and then the Treaty of Versailles on top of it. So the Rapallo Treaty itself, what it did is in this agreement between the Germans and the Soviets, it canceled the reparations that were assigned to both of them. And it also canceled the debts that they had accrued after the war. It reestablished diplomatic relations between them formally, and the goal was to prioritize Germany in the Soviets' external trade. So basically, in the process of production, they were thinking about Germany as a top priority trade partner. So what that would do is that would reestablish both diplomatic and an economic relationship. And basically, the whole thing would create a goodwill between these two countries. A good example of that is how we later learned that German soldiers, upon being dismantled, would be able to go and train with the Red Army. In some instances, away from the gaze of the British and the French. So that's sort of the sum total of what the treaty was. In terms of Broué's chapter, as he emphasizes throughout the book, he places an importance on the internal conflicts that structured the signing of the treaty and then what happened afterward. So Broué contends that there was this sort of general note of surprise when the bourgeois Germans agreed to this treaty. The Social Democrats were stressing dangers of this sort of alliance, and the Independents, which they were part of a party that emerged after a split in the German Social Democratic Party. We talked about it probably a few streams ago. Especially, basically between those who were interested in being reformist, in reforming existing social structure, and those who wanted to try and cut a path between that and between Bolshevism. So basically, those independent groups opposed the policy because they opposed elements of Lenin's new economic policy, the mixed economy that the Soviets were using, that the Bolsheviks were using to sort of fortify themselves in their economy after all the shit that they had to go through in the beginning parts of the 20th century. And so there was some conflict, there was some discord around that. And as well as there were parties, a lot of the parties that we'll go on to discuss today who spoke out in favor of it. Essentially, and I'll just wrap it up. Those in favor, they saw the treaty as a means for. I got a good Trotsky quote here. I'll quote Trotsky. He said, "Restore the most elementary interstate and economic relations between the two." So the idea wasn't to sort of the idea wasn't to like put the brakes on the revolution necessarily. It was to, after the First World War, kind of bring things back to a place in which they could start to move forward readily and ably again. And basically, the last part, and I think what's very interesting about this chapter is at the end of it, Broué gets into some like nitty gritty historian stuff. We don't need to focus on it, but I think it's a good example if you've read the chapter or if you plan on it at some point. At the end of chapter 30, he starts to get into disagreements in terms of the arguments that other historians have made about this topic. And it's about the interpretation of a particular primary source. Primary sources being a document or an object or some sort of object item that was created and developed within the context of that historical event. And then that's interpreted into secondary sources, like the book that we're reading right now, books that are written about those primary documents. So Broué does a really interesting job of framing what we would call an historiographic conflict here, which is basically the way that the history has been written thus far. And I think that's really important. And I like that in a book that's about like introducing us to a very broad sort of take, not a broad as in, but broad as in lots of varying sort of the sum total of various parts, and then a lot of details about those parts, to also talk about how the book itself was constructed, which I think is really interesting. And that will be it for me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Just like,
what's up?
sorry, just like 5 minutes. I'm going to get dinner.
Oh yeah, no worries.
But
We
no,
gotcha.
continue on without me, obviously.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so Kyle brought up some, before I go ahead and start summarizing the next 2 chapters, Kyle actually brought up something that we talk about all the time on this stream, and we're going to keep talking about it because it's super important. And it's this fancy pants academic sounding word called historiography, which, if you don't know, just means how we tell history. It's, so history is the stuff in it, the stories in and of themselves of the past, and historiography is the method. Historiography is, what facts do you pick out? Who are your sources? Those kind of like big methodological questions. How are you telling the story? And it's something that, as radicals, as revolutionaries, we have to think a lot about, because everyone who's, raised in a, white supremacist capitalist system is learning a capitalist white supremacist, historiography. You're learning about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson as these, clever, clever idealists who had all these uh, high-minded ideals about liberty and justice and blah blah blah, but uh, they had these things called slavery. I don't think that was very liberty of them. So it's through these new historiographies that center, the struggle for, say, emancipation of slaves, and um, the resistance of indigenous peoples to, colonial conquest, etc. Those are new historiographies that we have to really conscientiously center in our discourse, not just because it's like the quote unquote, woke thing to do, but because it's actually materially important for creating revolutionary consciousness. Because, as Lenin told us, the ideal socialist is not a trade union bureaucrat, but a tribune of the oppressed. And in order to be a tribune of the oppressed, you have to, know the history of oppressed peoples from their own perspective. And so that's really why, that's one of the reasons that examining historiography is so important. And so we're never going to stop talking about that on these streams. You can bet your bottom dollar on that. And yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and start summarizing chapter 31, which is called uh, For the United Front Against Poverty and Reaction. Um, so there's this conference of the so-called three internationals, which the internationals are these communist or socialist and communist organizations. The second communist international, or second international, was created from it's the kind of the pre-war association of socialists from around the world, which uh, was pretty much after the outbreak of World War I, pretty much disintegrated over the issue of embracing the war, which of course was, a bourgeois, uh, you know, uh, creation, and submission to it was pretty much a universal betrayal of everything that socialists had stood for up to that point. Socialists had been, very conscientious anti-war activists, anti-militarist activists, etc. And so the Second International more or less completely falls apart after that. And then the Third International, or sometimes simply known as the Comintern, is formed after the Bolshevik Revolution in October of 1917. I believe it's actually formed sometime in 1918. I'm not getting that right off the top of my head. But anyhow, so there's that, and then there's this other thing called the Two and a Half International, which is basically some of the kind of reformist parties from the Second International, tried to kind of form a new one kind of on their own. Sometimes I think also called like the Vienna International or something like that. Um, so they have a conference, and it's pretty much acknowledging that uh, the things are not going so hot for the socialist movement in the European continent, and that if we want to fight back against the bourgeoisie, we're going to have to get our shit together. So let's have a conference and talk about what our potential things are, our options for long-term struggle are. So in this conference, the SPD, the German Social Democratic Party, present themselves as pretty much totally hostile to any kind of collaboration with the communists. And the KPD does the exact opposite. They were like, no, we're on the defensive. We have to work together to, defeat this reactionary onslaught of, capitalism that's, gonna try to crush us beneath its feet. Um, and so yeah, that's kind of sets the tone for everything that happens next in this chapter, which is to say that 1922 saw kind of the resurgence of factory councils as a major centerpiece of the labor struggle. Um, And the KPD, as I mentioned earlier, have a very authentic working class base. And one of the things that they're really focused on in this period is kind of gaining influence through the factory councils, through getting their people elected into positions of power within the factory council system, and just more in the labor movement more broadly. Um, and so Article 65 of the Weimar Constitution incorporates a lot of the working class structures into, like, trade unions and stuff into the state itself. And I think this is actually something that's still somewhat true about how the German economy is structured, and there's a word for it that I can't remember. But anyway, they have the right to participation in consultation, which basically means the workers have more of a say in how production gets managed, and wages and that kind of thing. Kind of incorporates them into the state, into the decision-making process of capitalism. So it's not, how you might say like workers control the means of production. It basically makes them subordinate appendages, while nominally giving them some voice. That's the way I understood it. Um, so yeah, and the council system is really important to the independent social democrats and the communists, because the electees to the councils have to be wage workers and not so-called full-timers or union bureaucrats. So there's kind of this that's what's the political appeal to them, is that it has to be rank and filers who are making who are gaining power in the council system, rather than some full-time union official. And this again really is a huge priority of the KPD in their labor strategy during this period. Um, they saw their opponents as both being kind of the old like labor bureaucracy and so-called labor aristocracy, and also the anarcho-syndicalists, because they wanted the councils to completely replace the unions as the kind of the main the primary organ of struggle, and the KPD saw that as antithetical to their aims. And so the KPD also creates something called control councils, which are basically like committees that mobilize workers, and especially like women workers and housewives. Yes, Eve pointed out the correct German word, co-determination. That was the word that I was thinking of. Thank you, Eve. So these control councils are basically kind of like highly organized consumer activism things that are primarily kind of oriented around housewives and women workers to fight things like price speculation, price gouging, and they also worked within the councils of unemployed peoples. Um, and that kind of, there's a lot of other stuff in chapter 31 that I want to talk about, but frankly, we've got more to move on with. Basically, it actually transitions really well into chapter 32, which is, as I mentioned earlier, the KPD is really organically tied to the working class in this period. But there's it can't be we can't stress the point too much that capitalist decay is really eating Germany alive right now. The Treaty of Versailles leaves them with very unfavorable terms. They owe all kinds of reparations and war debt, and instead of that being placed on the shoulders of the capitalist class, the capitalists basically pass the bill to the workers and say, okay, we're going to increase cost of living, we're going to increase the price of bread, blah, 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 blah. And this is your problem, not our problem. Because, capitalists, we know them to be such sweethearts. Anyway, so Brondler, at the end of 1922, says that the KPD did not yet know how to adapt itself sufficiently to the non-communist working classes. So despite having this very kind of solid implantation within the working class, they were still very insular in that regard. They kind of there's a passage where Broué talks about how they printed thousands of issues of their newspaper, Die Rote Fahne, the Red Flag, but almost nobody except for actual party members, and really only a small portion of them actually read the paper, and even fewer read Die Internationale, which is the International, which is their theoretical journal. So they it's a mixed bag, basically. This is what this chapter is getting into, is that the party recovers from the catastrophe of the March action in 1921, slowly but surely, and the communists are continuing to gain influence in the unions. They recover, I think, about 100,000 of their members over the course of 1922. But this is I'm going to keep stressing these points because they're very important. Broué writes, above all, the KPD was a party of workers, particularly of young workers. And it's estimated that about 90% of the party membership was from the working class. And although there's not a whole lot of reliable data on it, it's estimated that between 1/12 and 1/6 of the party were women. Which is higher than the other than other parties. Anyhow, and it's also worth mentioning that the workers who are being recruited to the KPD in this period are, by and large, workers who were came of age during World War I and during the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, which is to say, all these young recruits to the party are full of anger and energy to smash the system, and that's really good because on one side, because it injects a lot of kind of new life into the party, um, and kind of cuts back, pushes back against kind of the stodgy, more, I guess, conservative tendencies within the party. On the other hand, it also creates it creates some volatility as well. So it's not just universally a good thing. The leadership of the party tended to be older, um, and yeah, many of the young members were. It's important to note that a lot of the young members were involved with the production of the party press. So a lot of young members of the KPD, like 21, 22, 23, like in their early 20s, were like on the editorial staff of party newspapers and like other pamphlets and that kind of thing. Um, and the members of the Centrala, the kind of the center organ of power of the party, were kind of cut of this older cloth. They were mostly in their 30s and 40s, and they were the activists who had survived from they were regarded as kind of like the veterans of social democracy. They'd survived from uh, the days back before the KPD had split off from the USPD and the USPD had split off from the SPD. Um, so that included a lot of like the old Spartacists who had been associated with Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. Um, Another significant fact that I wanted to note is that party dues were actually kind of huge. Party dues were like as much as 1 hour or more of workers' wages per week. So that's pretty significant. Like, can you imagine like paying out like, and like if say you make $15 an hour, so you make paying, 15 times, so you're paying $90 a month to be a party member, basically. Uh, so that's significant. And this is not in an easy economic time either. This is, as I said earlier, like this is in the middle of an absolute shit show of an economic meltdown after the war. So the party is placing pretty demanding constraint financial demands on their members, and I think it's telling those that people were still paying them. People, I mean, not everyone could, but like people were still paying their dues like regularly. And I think you see other things that are kind of important notes here, which is that there was a very strong culture of internal debate in the party, which was very much kind of an inheritance of the Spartacist tradition. They were known for having very kind of lively and high level debates, um, and they also had a lot of new kind of cultural institutions, uh, right? So a big thing was singing. They'd sing labor songs. They'd sing, the Internationale. They'd sing uh, everything. Uh, lots of singing involved, basically. And there's this great quote which I have bookmarked here. I'm going to pull it up real quick. The communist youth played a pretty central role, and so this is a description of the inauguration ceremony of the communist youth. This is a quote from, let's see, Manfred Uhlemann, in 31st of March in 1923. Quote, "The inauguration ceremony in the Marble Palace at Chemnitz was to show clearly the fire burned in the young men and women who came from every region of Germany. The delegations were welcomed by the workers of this industrial city and came forward to the sound of their battle songs, unfurling their red banners into into the huge, magnificently decorated hall. After the triumphal march of Aida, the Robespierre overture, the recital of Gorky's Song of Stormy Petrel, and the oath of the Red Army soldier spoken by the chorus of the communist youth of Chemnitz, everyone stood to sing the Internationale. The Congress delegates welcomed representatives of the Communist Youth International by singing the March of the Red Guards. So, yeah, the Communist youth were, there's a lot of spectacle, but they were also really centrally important for the party. They're frequently where they would draw kind of the young up-and-comers from, and like this is in a party that's already very, very young overall. And I think I'll just wrap up by kind of giving executive summary here, which is that the parties in the 1921 to 1922 period was in a period of like recovery and kind of slow but steady, growth, and it was highly organized and militant, and it was respectably large considering the conditions they were in. They numbered about 250,000 members in 1922, but its influence is harder to measure, and Broué kind of emphasizes that it's also highly uneven. So it's very kind of isolated to particular parts of the country, for one thing, and it's also highly, limited insofar as they had control of several many factory councils. They are having a kind of a big ideological influence on the workers who are in their kind of immediate influence, but on the whole, they were still pretty isolated from the greater mass of the working class, despite their best efforts. And it would be really hard to say that they weren't trying, because they were definitely deeply implanted within the working class. So that pretty much wraps up chapters 31 and 32. I'm sorry if I skipped anything big, but we've got a lot more to get through today, and I want to kind of give us room to breathe and, ask my co-hosts if there's anything they want to reflect on from that. And I know I just kind of dumped a bunch of stuff out and I talk pretty fast, so. And also our chat, please give us your comments. Happy to keep the discussion kind of loose and going while we're going along and summarizing.
I wish we could get like a whole bunch of 20-somethings to sing the International in public. That would be pretty cool.
That would. I'd love that. I mean, like, one thing that I keep being struck by this by this whole like period in Germany is just how all pervasive the socialist movement is. Like, everyone in their, like, before the discrediting of the SPD and the First World War, like, everyone and their mom was in this party. You couldn't, everyone, there was, bars, there were like pubs that had, the owner would be like a party member, and people would be like, having trade union meetings and blah blah blah. And there were like, summer camps and youth schools and all these like huge,
yeah, it was like a cultural phenomenon.
Yeah, it was absolutely massive. And like,
it was, what we would want in a dual structure.
Absolutely.
When we think of dual power, that's what I think of, except not SPD, but like, socialist and communist.
Sure. Yeah, more broad.
I mean, it really kind of reminds me of what I think the IWW in specific, I'm biased here, could be. Is truly a space outside of capitalism where, you not only, can send your kids to something if you have kids, or, you participate in yourself. And for some lucky people where they worked for the, the KPD or whatever, their whole lives would be, more or less outside capitalism, and I'm kind of envious of them.
Yeah. Oh, and as we've discovered through doing the reading
And
here, that ends up being a kind of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand you have, committed people who can really spend a lot of time being party activists. But on the other side, it kind of a lot of people ended up being in the SPD especially kind of ended up getting incorporated into the capitalist structure, and like full-time party officials were like part of that labor aristocracy that Lenin railed against all the time, which is, you get yourself a cushy job as, uh, whatever, senior undersecretary of this region or whatever, and you can kind of put up your feet and not worry too much about the actual socialist movement, and you kind of become detached from it. um, so
there's a,
these things come with a price. um,
there's a degree of efficacy in term. Sorry.
no, please.
I'll be very brief, I promise. There's an efficacy to the production of culture. It's very efficient at solidifying elements of society in spite of other things that are going on. And the best example that I can think of is something that I am writing an article on right now, actually. There in central Italy, up through the 1980s, there was basically there was a red block to where the PCI, the Communist Party of Italy, remained relevant in spite of a lot of other changes that were going on in the country, and in spite of sort of an ebb in their influence and other usually it's all about changes of production and like people moving around and stuff, and that's the long story. But the short of it is that basically, the scholarship suggests that the reason why the Communist Party stayed so relevant and effective and meaningful in people's lives and had a huge membership still in this part of the country rather than other parts of the country is that central Italy was filled with sports clubs, pubs, institutions of the production of culture that created like generations of affinity with not just a party but the various varying parts that totalize and make up that party. So using culture as a means for bringing people together, giving them a space of experience, giving them a place in which they can express themselves, learn, commune with one another, and to produce culture that is in and of themselves is extremely effective. And I would point to one historian. There's a British historian, a Marxist humanist, who made a big impact on this field of study in the 50s and the 60s. His name's E.P. Thompson. I cite him a lot. He's a great. The Making of the English Working Classes would be a good book to take a peek at for that.
Oh, I'll actually remind me. I'll put the audiobook version of that up on my Google Drive if anyone wants
Great
that.
idea.
It's a really long audiobook, but it's really good. Anyways, I interrupted you, Kyle. Please continue.
It's a long book. Yeah. No, you didn't. I was actually, you hit the nail on the head. I was done. But I think, yeah, that would be great. It's a really long book, but long books of history, you don't always have to read every single word of it. You get the impression that you need what the book is trying to say, and then you read the parts that you have time for or you find most interesting, and like you'll get the gist of it, and it's a really cool read.
Oh, I'm a Vamer, so I'm a completionist. I need to get that achievement award at the end of the audiobook.
You get the trophy.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, I personally like, for me, the longer the book, the better, when it comes to history, at least. Because even though a historiographical practice, you need to delimit yourself somehow, but the more time and pages you have to develop your thoughts, include sources, provide information and context, I think that's incredibly valuable. And
Yeah.
it's kind of surprising that a book this length gave maybe 10 pages to the Bavarian Social Republic. And I'm like, why? Sorry, that's just a general
Sure.
complaint that I guess I
Yeah, I can't speak
Because
to
it's the
that.
English working class. I think that's just why.
I'm sorry.
It's geography. That's why.
Okay. I mean, it says the German
That's all. Yeah.
Revolution, not the Berlin.
Oh, you're talking about this book. I thought you were talking about Thompson.
Oh, no.
Oh, you're talking about
Oh,
Thompson.
sorry.
Apologies.
Oh no.
No,
It
you're
was
fine.
the
You're
making
fine.
of the English working class. That's it's in the
Yeah,
title. Of course, it's not going to talk about Germany.
yeah. So
I was
Trekkie,
mistaken. Don't worry.
yeah, Trekkie, you mentioned, those long books give more info, more context, and uh, one of my favorites, none other from the great contributor to the study of historiography himself, Edward Hallett Carr, in his 14-volume history of the Soviet Union, of which I have read almost to the end of the first one, and I have um, the second two uh, volumes of waiting for me on my shelf, which hopefully we will maybe cover on this channel sometime in the future. Maybe as a study group, maybe I'll just do videos, but it's a very important history that I think especially folks in the West don't know nearly enough about. And I think Carr's uh, context and level of care to his uh, the way that he approaches the history is definitely something that I admire a lot in him, despite the fact he's not even Marxist or a radical really, but I think he just has a tremendous kind of respect for the craft and I even as a non-historian, I can see that coming off the page from him. Anyway, before we get too wrapped up in discussion here, I think we should pass things off to Simba, if you are ready, comrade, for your summary of chapter 33.
Yes, I am. Mine is going to be significantly shorter and maybe more broad than your guys, but probably because it's a like much more focused set of problems. And I guess Mel, you did 2 chapters.
Yeah, that's
So
all right.
yeah, cool. Just let me know if I'm like glitching out in the chat or something. In any
Fine
case,
to me, comrade.
sorry, what's that?
Oh, I said you sound fine to me.
Awesome. Cool. Let me just scroll to a thing and hope that Stokely, my dog, shuts up.
Is he
I have
named after Kwame Ture?
Yes, Stokely is named after
Nice.
Kwame Ture. Uh, yeah, but chapter 33 is called The Workers' Government. And basically, the Zentrale and the KPD needed a new program, drawing from the now antiquated program of the Spartacus League of Leibniz and Luxembourg fame. And the new program was adopted by a simple majority with the left wing dissenting. It was like 24 votes in favor to 23 votes against, calling the left wing called the program an opportunist kind of turn for the party. The controversial new program proposed either a progressive form of state capitalism under the watchful eye of the dictatorship of the proletariat, or an opportunistic form of state capitalism seeking to compromise with the bourgeois government, which preceded or didn't include any kind of dictatorship of the proletariat. And that depended on who you asked. Those two sorts of interpretations went to the first one was the sort of like right-wing, almost centrist folks, and then the left-wing folks were more like, nah, that's not a dictatorship of the proletariat, respectively. And the demands in the new program included, but were not limited to, a majority participation of the state in every firm, unionization and trustification of industry under factory committees, abolition of banking, and a state monopoly on the food supply. And the new program wasn't like adopted to like be the backbone, so to speak, of the KPD. It was much more to appeal to workers and like recover losses from the 66% drop in membership after I think the split with the SPD. Was
the
it
March action that
the March?
alienated?
Sorry, the March
Yeah.
action. Yeah, it was much more to appeal to workers, particularly in Saxony. A whole lot of what was going on after the March action was like trying to get people in very particular regions back into the party. And Broué himself sort of takes the position that that new program that I just mentioned was like a state capitalist bunch of proposals that were made just to attract workers rather than serve as a concrete backbone as well. He doesn't think that much of it, other than it caused a whole lot of commotion. Much ado about nothing, to steal Shakespeare's phrase. The ECI, more broadly, thought that the KPD should be so supportive of such a government that adopted the tenets of the new program that the KPD ought to prepare to disarm counter-revolutionaries. But the KPD kind of stayed pretty reserved. They wanted to make their like modest sorts of gains, and this ECCI was much more like, we're Bolsheviks, just like do it, you know. And the critical problem actually was that the KPD, under the administration of the ECCI, was proposing that workers create a government which the KPD would refuse to take part in governing because of the requirements to be a part of the ECCI and the kind of political culture at the time. There was definitely a sort of understanding that truly like socialist like parties that were associated with the ECCI would not join or form governments with parties that were not like explicitly socialist. So given that the KPD didn't really want to cooperate with or form a government with a party that was not socialist, like, and the places that they were appealing to, like, their party wasn't popular, like, it was just sort of this weird situation where it's like, okay, you want the workers to like do this thing and have a government that does all of those things, but like you wouldn't associate with that government. Like, that doesn't really make sense. And hopefully, does, like, should I explain what forming a government means in like parliamentary politics, just so everybody's on the same page, or does everybody like get that?
Yeah, I think that would be good to do.
Yeah, okay. So in the Reichstag and in a lot of parliamentary democracies, basically you don't vote for a candidate, you vote for a party, and there's like a Brazilian different parties. If you're outside of Brazil, there's a million different parties. Basically, if you have a whole bunch of parties that represent a whole lot of different interests, be they political, economic, regional, whatever, then you won't always have a party that gets like a simple majority. A simple majority meaning like 50% plus one person votes for that thing. You'll have like some parties that get like 20%, and then another party gets like 11, and you'll have like 5 or 6 that are sort of in that range. So parties with very high percentages have to form a coalition or an alliance with a party that gets around the same number, so that they do have like 50% plus 1% of the vote. So if I have one party that gets like, 21% and another party that gets 30% of the vote, those two, like, because the majority, like the plurality, or the party that got the most votes got 30%, they get to like pick another party that they want a coalition with, and with that coalition they like form a government. So that's what like forming a government means.
That's
famously
very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. And oh yeah, so cool. Basically, what the KPD was opposed to doing was, if they were the party that got 30%, if the party that got 21% was not socialist, they didn't want to form a government with that party, which was absolutely the case in Saxony, that like all of the other parties that, were popular were not socialist or were like actively working against the KPD. So they just wanted to do their pure socialist thing, and they wouldn't, like it didn't work. In any case, the KPD's staunchly proletarian stance clearly conflicted with the need for a united front at the time, and this contradiction kind of had to be dealt with. Karl Radek specifically was 100% for the KPD participating in absolutely any government that was willing to struggle against capitalism, regardless of what they stood for or what the makeup was. In the end, the KPD voted to support a government with the program's tenets, but in that vote, there was no language to hint at how much the KPD would be willing to participate in that government. And there were a whole lot more debates among the KPD members on how purely socialist the KPD should be, almost as if the question really wasn't answered at the end, which that's my interpretation more or less. And beyond that, there were concerns about the tempo of the revolution, given that the majority of the working class was not really on their side. Trotsky particularly was concerned about putschism, which is the need to immediately overthrow the government, and in general be pretty violent about that from the left wing. And that was a very dangerous tendency that thankfully we didn't have to worry about that much around 1921 when this chapter was written about. So that's my summary.
Yeah, that was great. Do we want to do a little bit more discussion before Trekkie gives their summary? Or Trekkie, do you want to just get right into it? Or I can't hear you. You're muted, comrade.
For reminding me. What was I gonna say? Have we talked? Have you guys talked about previously what the term "United Front" means? Because it's kind of important.
Yeah, that's a really critical thing to touch on. The way that I've heard the term United Front formulated, and the way that I've generally used it in my own political language, is uh, uh, marching separately but striking together, which is that, different organizations have kind of different goals and, uh, you know, kind of greater agendas, but a united front on, say, opposing fascism would be, okay, well, we have our disagreements about this, that, and the other thing, but that's not what's at issue right now. We're going to have a united front and, go out and have an anti-fascist demonstration. For example, that's usually how I hear the term united front used. That's my understanding of it as a political term.
Yeah.
Feel free to set
mean,
me straight if that's totally off base, but that's how I've heard it
oh,
used.
I meant specifically in the because my chapter deals a lot with the concept of the United Front, and it builds off of Simba's chapter of what does it mean to form a government? Should we form a government? What tactics should we use, etc.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
why I wanted to. That's why I wanted to make sure that we had gone over that, because I
Yeah.
know my
Okay.
chapter wasn't the first one that dealt with
Right.
the United Front specifically in the theory of the KPD.
Yeah, so I want to get to that real then, because I guess I am kind of more familiar with how it's used in the more general political sense, and less familiar with how it's used in this historical context. So yeah, I don't have a great prepared answer for that. So I don't know, Trekkie, do you want to handle that, or Kyle, is that something that you are familiar enough with?
I mean,
In terms of my familiarity with, go for it, Trey.
I think I interrupted you. Sorry.
It's okay. Keep it.
Hello?
No, it's okay. I've talked enough. Go for it.
Oh, okay, sure. Sorry, I was a bit confused. Also my music suddenly turned up way too loud, so I needed to turn that down. Um the way I understood United Front was they were talking about it in electoral terms, in terms of the KPD, if its own terms were met, being willing to form a government with the SPD. This again, this is kind of going into my chapter, which is the idea of what is a work. Since this kind of dovetails so well into my chapter, do you mind if I kind of go ahead and kind of cheat into it?
Yeah, that would absolutely be appropriate.
Okay, so a central part of my chapter is on the tactics being discussed among everyone in the November 1922 meeting of the or fourth meeting of the Comintern. And essentially what was on the agenda was the idea of the United Front and what workers' government is. Hold on. I believe I have yeah, and there was also this idea of what is a workers' government. Should we participate in a workers' government? If I recall correctly, Simba kind of dealt briefly with fuck, what was I gonna say? Workers' government. And Simba was talking about the debate, whether communists should or should not engage and become part of, governments with non-socialist partners. And so around that time in Australia and in Britain, labor parties had, if not been in government, then at least been in coalition. And those were what a lot of the communists referred to as liberal worker governments, because, they're reformist, but like the Ebert government before, the capitalists essentially said, yeah, for a brief time, the social democratic or even liberal workers governments can be useful to give just enough concessions for the workers to stop agitating, and then they throw them all out again for right-wing reactionaries. But the debate was whether or not to use the United Front tactic, and if you use the United Front tactic, what's the nature of the United Front, and in what capacity should a communist government join, or Communist Party join a workers' government, or even what is a workers' government? Is it synonymous with the dictatorship of the proletariat? I mean, hell, there was in that is encapsulated of the argument of what is the dictatorship of the proletariat. And again, this goes back to a split from the KPD right and KPD left, where essentially the KPD right wanted to give as much concessions to probably the SPD if they were ever going to go in government, and the left essentially said that, yeah, the dictatorship of the proletariat is the only way for a workers' government to work. And what a workers' government / dictatorship of the proletariat is factory councils, workers controlling their own means of production, and kind of like the state more as kind of like a central coordinating body. And there was also kind of a middle path that I believe the majority in the Comintern kind of went by, which is do the United Front and only participate in governments if you can be guaranteed you'll get all of your concessions. And it's they kind of tried to thread the needle, but it didn't really work because there are a lot of different competing concepts of, again, there was this concept that the Congress, the Comintern Congress adopted, and I'm going to read a quote from the article, which is talking about kind of this conception of what a workers' government is or could be. The Congress noted. There were. Oh, sorry. There were three main types. There's a social democratic workers' government, false workers' governments, or even liberal workers' governments. Anyway, the Congress noted three other kinds of workers' governments: a workers' and peasants' government, which could be foreseen as a possibility in Czechoslovakia or the Balkans, a workers' government with communist participation, and finally, quote, a real proletarian workers' government, which in its purest form could, quote, only be embodied in the Communist Party, unquote. In the first two cases, communists were ready to march with the working class elements who had not yet recognized the dictatorship of the proletariat, and even, quote, in certain conditions and under certain guarantees, unquote, to support a non-communist workers' government. Essentially what that means, I think the term, if you wanted to be derogatory, the term opportunism comes in, but I feel as though a lot of a lot of those people recognize that. While they also tried to take a pragmatic approach of, what else are we gonna do? The revolution. Um, the revolution is kind of slowed down. We do what we have to do, as long as we make sure that everyone's kind of still plugged into the working class. We gotta kind of leave the situation. And Also, who oh yeah, the Congress also essentially adopted the line, or at least part of it, I believe. Conclusion touch.
Which page is that on?
Yeah. Essentially. Oh, I'm looking at page 679.
Okay, cool. I'm looking at it too.
And it was essentially the idea that a workers' government or working within the system isn't necessarily inevitable, but if you get a chance to do it, probably should. Anyways, and then there was kind of like that internal conflict of this idea from the left faction of the communists, or it's like, no, we should only be participating in bourgeois governments if it's literally us in control, and the workers and soldiers councils kind of running the day-to-day operations. Just to be transparent, I'm an anarchist, so I very much sympathize with left communists. Just like to put it completely out there. And that a dictatorship of the proletariat should be, should be the only form of workers' government that they should participate in. And it ended up that the left were the Fourth Congress kind of tried to chart a middle route.
Yeah, it seems like, I mean,
Yeah.
this is my read of it, is that they tried to, as you said, thread the needle and try to kind of find a middle path, but ended up just kind of having a confused policy. Is that more or
Yeah,
less it?
exactly. Like, what is it? What does it mean to say, as long as they have these demands, then we'll work with the Social Democrats, or if they
Yeah,
don't have these demands, we'll do that. And it's like,
yeah, it kind of reminds me in the Russian Revolution of the period immediately after February, which in the Russian language is "постольку поскольку," which means insofar as, which is kind of this policy that we will the soldiers specifically will do what we're told insofar as do as we're told from the provisional government, the bourgeois government, insofar as "постольку поскольку," as it doesn't deviate from the order from the dictates of the Soviet, um, which is that was like in a specific contradiction of dual power. Um, but I think this is a little bit different, just because uh, the bourgeoisie in Germany is so in this period is is not in the same situation. They are not weak. They are injured, but on the offensive. And I think that, like, one thing that stands out to me through this whole period, that the kind of that the theory of the offensive was totally, like, out of step with the kind of more defensive tactics that were or defensive strategy that would have probably been more appropriate given the circumstances. I don't know. It's again, it's very hard to see these things retroactively, and it's always tempting, as we talked about on this program before. Like, it's always very easy with, reading history to be like, oh, well, if we had been there, we should have, could have done X, Y, and Z. But, like, we have the benefit of hindsight, and these things are often way more complicated than they appear.
History is complicated
Oh,
as
yeah.
fuck. That's why nuance exists. And that's why I mentioned earlier that the longer the history for me, the better, because it means you can give more and more context.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because context and nuance are, as I said, important as fuck. Yeah, anyways,
yeah, so sorry.
did I miss anything?
No. That was a fantastic summary. Thank you, everyone, all of my co-hosts, for doing those summaries. Those are really excellent. Generally, how we have this go is, after we do our general summaries, like we just did, we kind of let things breathe a little bit and kind of go around and talk about, just thoughts that we have. They don't necessarily need to be immediately connected to what we were talking what we were talking about in the summaries. They can be related to kind of the greater flow of the revolution, or they could be related to other world events, or they could be related to, what's going on right here and now. And as I mentioned in our introduction, right, that we've got kind of if not a capital R revolution, certainly a revolutionary moment at our gates here, right? And so I think that there's plenty to talk about, and there's plenty to kind of contextualize and tease out implications. So I absolutely welcome anyone to give their thoughts, including the chat, by the way. So chat, you're always welcome to contribute to this discussion. Absolutely like to keep these things as open as possible. And I know I've done a lot of talking today, so I'm probably going to step back a bit. But yeah, other than that, I'd love to just kind of let discussion flow pretty freely. So if y'all have thoughts, just, let them flow.
I'd actually like to take just 2 seconds to push back a little bit on something Trekkie said. The notion that the longer history books are, the better is strictly untrue, because the longer history books are, the more emails you have to send to find citations and primary sources of things that are badly translated or not translated at all. I'm mostly kidding, but I'm kind of not. But yeah, no, just joking. But yeah, like, the more citations there are, like, the more frustrating things get, in my opinion.
Oh,
I
mean,
love checking citations and then fixing them and looking at page numbers and fixing my translations and then going back to my citations and then fixing my translations and so on and so forth until I die. Personally. Okay, sorry.
Will you excuse me if I literally am a little N baby 5-year-old and fall asleep to people telling me stories?
All right, you're excused.
No, like, I listen to so many fucking books and audio. That's literally how I do my grad work. Is I either get a PDF and have slight British Siri read to me, or I have like actual audiobooks, and I literally play video games while taking notes. And I did that for my final paper. And I also
That's
do it
awesome.
while buzzed out of my
That's cool.
as a fucking space shuttle.
Dope. Yeah. To each their own. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
In my opinion. I never thought to like.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say that I never thought to have British Siri read to me, but that sounds like a very good idea.
Yeah, the application, which is completely free, is called Air Space Read Space Book, and I know for a fact it's on iOS. If you need it. No, yeah, that's how I've been listening to this book, and I mean, I really have been enjoying it. I think it's fascinating, especially because how much counterfactuals it brings up. You know, for me, the main lesson to extract from all this, as I said earlier, is that never let is you always need to seize the radios and the press. Yeah, that's why the first major conflict between the Stalinists and the anarchists in the Spanish Civil War was when the Stalinists tried to. By the way, I use that term very deliberately, Stalinist. Just want to point that out there. Hashtag not all communists. Tried to seize the telephone. It yeah, it was the it was the telephone. Read homage to Catalonia. It's great. But my point is that it really kind of wonder because Broué makes a big point of that. Yeah, there was socialism in far as workers and soldiers councils in a lot of Germany, during like 1918, 1919, but they didn't seize the press and they conceded to Ebert in the big national assembly they had. Yeah, sorry if you guys already talked about this, but
No, it's all
wanted
right.
to just ask for general thoughts.
Yeah, and I mean, like, uh, I'll be perfectly honest. The Spanish Civil War is something I know absolutely diddly nothing about. So I'm not going to comment on anything related to it. But Queer POTUS is joining us in the chat, and he said, or sorry, they say, I don't know their pronouns. Was the statue toppling a thing during these revolutions? Do you think statue toppling is meaningful or purely aesthetic? I actually have a thought on that, like immediately, which actually I'm kind
Fuck
of
statues.
stealing from Three Arrows Dan's channel, which is that like I actually do think that like removing these statues, particularly of like bloodthirsty racist colonialist bastards, is like a great thing, because and not just purely aesthetic, because as Dan says in his video, the statue isn't just like a, it's not abstract, like it stands in a space and kind of imposes itself over people, and like having a, statue of, Andrew Jackson is just like, riding a horse or whatever is just like a giant, hey, native people, fuck you, you are subordinate, um, like,
Exactly. And
and it's not,
also
it's not like divorced from its context, and like I think symbolically taking down the statues, like again, like symbols are not, I think, purely aesthetic. Like they're such a like they change conversations, and like you physically are changing the space around you. And I think it's a very powerful exertion of agency on the part of oppressed people to tear down statue monuments to their oppressors, and be like, no, no, we don't want this statue of, you know, Wilhelm Genocide the Third standing on our corner. Uh, screw that. Like, we're gonna tear it down and smash it to bits.
Mel,
well,
to your
the thing-
point,
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Kyle, what's up?
go ahead, Treggy. Go ahead.
Oh, no. I
Oh,
thought
Treggy, you had something to say. Go for it.
I was just going to well, what I have to say is going to take a while, and it's my answer to Queer POTUS's question. So, Kyle, you go, since I'm going to go on a bit of a soapbox.
Okay. Well, two quick things. One, I'm usually the early bailer around 8:30, so I'll sign off on this. But POTUS, first of all, hi POTUS, nice to see you. Second of all, that's a really good question. I agree with Melody's assessment of the situation, and I think a good example is an additional example, because we live in the United States after all, for sort of the what the discourse around monuments does over periods of time. Shocker, we're going to go back to the Italian. It's me. I love my Italian defender. Labor Kyle has logged on. It after the fascist regime fell in Italy, what remained were a great deal of public history projects, public monuments, architectural projects that the fascists constructed conscripted from existing architects and then constructed for very specific, very meaningful reasons. The vast majority of those public monuments have stayed standing in the same way that the sort of post-Confederacy monuments in the United States have also remained. And what they have done, in the same way that monuments in the U.S. have the discourse around these particular statues has changed, evolved, and incorporated itself into its environment. So now that could be fine, right? Well, people give new meaning to things, and like, I don't think it's fine, for the record, but people give new meaning, they attribute value in different ways. Let's be nuanced with this, right? And yes, it's absolutely true. However, people are not the concern here. The concern are fascists, new fascists, neo-fascists, or post-fascists, who also create new means of engaging with these spaces. And to put a long story short, I wrote an article. I did a conference paper on this, and the conference got canceled. So I'm trying to get someone to publish this.
Thanks for the follow.
The idea there's a significant there are significant ways that not only are post and neo-fascists able to use these spaces of culture in order to further their own aims, but the liberal governments that dominate the Western world and the sort of the neoliberal moment that we're currently living in are also extremely ineffective at combating and taking down these monuments, because what you see happen, like what happened in Italy. In Italy, for example, around the time where they started to try recontextualizing these monuments, the liberals in the government were trying to pass laws banning Mussolini's image. And they did so successfully. And by successfully, I mean not at all successfully, because people kept doing it anyways. Because all of these little Potemkin towns, one of them being Mussolini's hometown, have popped up as memorials to fascism. For example, Mussolini's hometown containing his burial site. He's entombed there, and it's a point of pilgrimage for contemporary neo and post-fascists. They are capable of using, manipulating, and taking these contemporary interpretations of these monuments and using them to their own advantage. So the reason why taking them down is good is, yes, absolutely, for the aesthetic moment. I actually think that matters, as well as the meaning that's attributed by the various movements of, say, working people or indigenous or oppressed peoples who are able to reclaim public space. It changes the way that we think about space and how it's ours and not theirs. But also because I almost said the enemy. I grew up evangelical, so it sounds like I'm talking about the devil. I'm not talking about the devil. Our enemy, our political enemies.
About me, boy.
Just to wrap up, our political enemies take advantage and use them opportunistically, and so as a result, we can see, based off of what's happened historically, that the statues contain so much more than the statue themselves. And on that note, I got to get going because I got to go digitally celebrate my sister-in-law's 40th birthday. I've been eating cake from it, actually. Pretty good. I just want to say thank you. You're all smart.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, you're all
Thank you
Have
so much
fun.
for joining us, Kyle. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Yeah,
Awesome.
thanks for your contribution and summarizing chapter 30. Take care.
Bye.
All right. Well, it's just the three of us now, and I'm happy to, it's my channel, my rules. I'm happy to keep the conversation going as long as y'all are interested in
Awesome.
sticking around. I think there's
Yeah,
still a
I
lot to
actually.
be conversation to be had, but you guys got to go and you got to go. So I don't want to
Oh
hold
no,
you up either.
Oh no, I'm totally down to be here for as long as you want, but I actually
Yeah.
want to give my answer to Queer POTUS's question. Well, answer-ish. I think statues in and of themselves are of individual people are problematic. And this is due to the way we tell history, which is very implicit in the way we think of stories. Stories for us need to have a main character, a supporting cast, some the sense that a single person or a small group of people are essential figures in a story, in a narrative that happens, and we try to do and even if these characters do have flaws and are three-dimensional, they're still characters, and we're told to lionize them, versus no actual humans are without flaws. And most of us well, everyone's a product of their time, and people are all have faults and are shitty to varying degrees. And I think it's very unhealthy to worship one person or a small group of people when it creates this hierarchy of history and attribute it even plays into the great or big man theory that history is influenced by great men, which has been debunked again and again. And yet because because of everyone's conditioning of history as just essentially patriotic bullshit with easy narratives that people don't need to think twice about, we're taught. And this idea of some people being fucking gods among men or whatever is used to reinforce this idea of the ruling class being somehow there for a reason. Statues aren't for history. They're for commemoration, for I mean literal idolization. I mean, the early one of the reasons why currency was made a thing originally is to spread this idea of the king. Like literally that's how they told people this is who you were being ruled by. And you take that, and history being told not as not in the historical materialist sense of two classes of various different makeups clashing in various different ways. It's, oh, Alexander the Great did this, and the tens of thousands of soldiers under his command were essentially just there. And statues very much feed into that, and it allows for hero worship, and it allows for the cult of the founding fathers that our country has.
Yeah, there's this
Sorry, I just
great
think it's very
there
important to realize that history is not as much as I think history should be in narrative form. It's important to realize, and I'm guilty of this too. It's important to realize that we, as much as it's great to have heroes and examples, real people aren't fictional characters. We can't tell history in the same exact way that we tell fiction. And I think we need to deconstruct the idea of heroes and hero worship and say, yeah, Karl Marx was amazing. He had a bunch of really great ideas, but he was also a huge racist and an anti-Semite. I mean, same thing with Bakunin.
right.
And
Bakunin had a lot of fucking anti-Semitism in his shit. It's kind of like, I
yeah,
mean, right, like we
and
all are
also
kind of
this idea that
stamped with the ideological and social prejudices of our times. It's not to say that we shouldn't be fighting them, because of course we should, but like, it's you won't find, you're not gonna, you know dig back through the history books and find somebody who was a perfect, you know, always had a good line on everything kind of person. But I just wanted to
I want
interject.
to have you know, Kim Jong-il never did wrong. He was born
Yeah.
on top of a mountain in a fucking rainstorm and died after orgasming 20 times in a consensual orgy.
Oh, I will learn something new every day.
That was clearly untrue. I
Yeah,
have
no.
know next to nothing about Kim Jong-il.
I don't. Again, I don't tend to speak on histories that I know little, if anything, about. But what you said about leaders and whatnot, leaders and great figures of the past, made me think of this great little poem by Bertolt Brecht called "Questions from a Worker Who Reads," which I thought I'd just share right now because it's so relevant to what you just said. Who built Thebes of the Seven Gates? In the books you will find the names of kings. Did kings haul up the lumps of rock? And Babylon, many times demolished, who raised it up so many times? In what houses of gold glittering Lima did the builders live? Where, the evening that the great wall of China was finished, did the masons go? Great Rome is full of triumphal arches. Who erected them? Over whom did the Caesars triumph? Had Byzantium, much praised in song, only palaces for its inhabitants? Even in fabled Atlantis, the night the ocean engulfed it, the drowning still bawled for their slaves. The young Alexander conquered India. Was he alone? Caesar beat the Gauls. But did he not have even a cook with him? Philip of Spain, what when his armada went down? Was he the only one to weep? Frederick II won the 7 Years' War. Who else won it? Every page of victory. Who cooked the feast for the victors? Every 10 years a great man. Who paid the bill? So many reports, so many questions. Uh, actually, that's the whole poem is by Bertolt Brecht, and I got it out of my
Comrade.
copy of People's History of the World by Chris Harman. It's the very first thing that's in his little book.
I mean, I really like that.
It's a great poem.
It perfectly encapsulates why this history is enjoyable to read and a lot of histories aren't. Because I'm going to show my clear bias here and say, unless you're doing historical materialism, you're not even fucking doing history. Because it just leads to liberal bullshit about, the inevitable progress of history or just utter simplification. If you don't take into account material conditions and at least generally take into condition how the mode of production, at least in Europe, if we're talking, because it's a very Eurocentric concept. Oh, by the way, to go back to statues, and venerating old dead white guys. Notice how it's white guys. The people we worship, at least on among white leftists, does seem to revolve around us. And yeah, I just wanted to point that out there. But yeah, I really like this book because it. I mean, if nothing else, the sources are really good. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
a big fan of
lots of primary sources.
I mean, not only that, but I mean, the dude used like personal card. I'm always a fan of using letters and shit like
Yeah.
that, especially because most times, unless you're fucking Winston Churchill, you're not planning on publishing these letters later.
So
in
I
life.
actually just wanted to interrupt real quick. Simba, I wanted to give you a chance to uh, give your input because we've been taking up a lot of air here.
About statues
Oh,
or what?
about whatever you want to go on about. You know,
Okay,
it's
well,
your the way I look at it is it's your space as much as it is ours. So
okay, sure.
go for it.
To answer Queer POTUS's question, which I think more or less everybody went over my opinion in some form or another. I think it's kind of ironic that political violence of the type that we're seeing right now is the result of a symbolic failure, to use Zizek's words, which is to say that Black people in this country have used every form of symbolism that exists, up to and including violence. And to explain the horrors of police brutality, nothing has worked in recent history. Like there have been all kinds of campaigns. There's all kinds of art that's made about the topic of police brutality and white supremacy in the United States. All kinds of music and stuff. And nothing has resulted in bringing up the question of whether or not we should have police or what the need for or where the need for police comes from at all, right? So all of that symbolism like has not worked, and now George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and countless others are dead, and the only way to redirect the frustration with the symbolic failure is to manifest physically as violence. And the violence, which is a result of that symbolic failure, is being penetrated mostly against statues, which themselves are a symbol, a physical symbol. And I think that there's something therapeutic about knowing that those symbols can crack and break and crumble, just like any other matter can. So,
Here,
yeah, I actually think that it's a fantastic thing that we're destroying these symbols, and I would hope that eventually we get rid of like the Roman inspired architecture that the United States has as well, because this is not fucking Italy or like some amalgamation of, the European mixing pot that all of the white nationalists, I'm sure, imagine this country as. This is fucking Turtle Island, and we need that shit, you know? So yeah,
Yeah.
those are.
We
I
should.
think it's worth shouting out. Simba has been, I think, co-hosting a reading group of Settlers by Jay Sakai. Is that still going on, or?
Yeah, that's coming back soon.
Sweet. Yeah,
Soon.
feel free to plug that.
See,
That's
I think
absolutely when I got shout out to your hard work
Oh,
as
I have
well.
several criticisms for the historiography of Sakai's book, but I think its overall message and frame is completely correct.
Yeah, I was just
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
I think a lot of people have problems with Settlers for like the wrong reasons, and you don't like read Settlers for it to like understand like a purely like correct theoretical frame with which to view the United States or settlers or anything. Like you read it to understand like what is a settler and how do they behave in leftist spaces. And
Exactly.
we already know like how reactionaries behave. That's very obvious. We know what the danger is there, but what is like the dangerous left wing settler? What do they look like? What kinds of things do they say and do? And how can they be pernicious to an otherwise liberatory movement?
Yeah, and how do we, take care not to reproduce white supremacy in our own spaces,
Exactly.
right? Like those are
By
things
destroying the
that I
concept
think,
of whiteness, duh.
right? Yeah, and I think that, despite, I think Simba, you said that, people have problems with settlers for the wrong reasons, and I think that's absolutely hits the nail on the head because I think, whatever theoretical concerns aside, it's really kind of a polemical device in that regard. and I think it's powerful.
Oh,
And anyway, so
I
uh,
agree with its theory. I don't agree with its historical conclusions, especially when it comes to the IWW. I literally wrote a historiography of the IWW in the
oh,
United
all
States,
right,
and I know for a fact that not only were they committed revolutionaries, but part of their inbuilt philosophy was interracial organizing, and still is. I mean, no one's perfect, but he essentially said that that they were a bunch of fucking rad libs, and I'm like, bitch, the fucking border sections of the IWW on both the US and Mexican border merged, and a bunch of fucking white ass motherfuckers literally were filibustering and helping out the the Mexican anarchists in their civil war. Oh, and a lot of them also got deported in the Bisbee deportation in essentially cattle cars in the heat, along with, you know, a lot of Mexican workers, because obviously, you know, no one's oh yeah, and also local 8 Philadelphia Longshoremen Union, first you know, big main interracial union.
yeah.
And again,
Yeah, I'd like to have you on to talk about chapter 6 and 7 then, if you're interested. But we can talk about that later.
I would actually love that, because that was some of the worst history I've ever seen, just to be completely honest with you.
All right.
And I think that kind of soured me a bit in the book. I mean, I don't come at it from an unbiased manner. Researching the IWW and its history has actually
If
made
you're
me
honest
more
about
biased in
not
its
being
figure.
unbiased, then it's fine.
Yeah, right. I
Yeah,
mean,
sorry to
that's
kind of hijack it to make to,
no,
you know, have my
it's
own little
fine. It's
soapbox.
okay. We have these tangents and good. I think, we
Yeah,
always manage to kind of keep things relevant and topical and not, because I feel like, if we stick a little bit too close to the script, so to speak, we end up kind of putting everyone to sleep. And we've
yeah,
got, a live audience of, typically somewhere between 5 and 20 people, depending on how things are, how how good of a job I do promoting the stream and whatnot. But this is why I like having on different guests and different perspectives, because we don't just stick to the script. We have this general formula where we talk about the chapter summaries, and then we kind of go wherever the hell we want with it. And I think that's what keeps
yeah.
folks coming back, and I think that that's actually essential to the way that we have an engaged teaching practice here, a learning and teaching practice.
Yeah, exactly. I do though want to say that I actually have been actively using the this idea to I in Silver Spook, actually a great YouTuber slash Twitch streamer, pointed this out to me. I think the idea that the reason why there really hasn't been revolution in the United States or any other, you know, settler colonialist state is because of this framework that the white proletariat essentially didn't exist during those times. And Silver Spook builds on it further by saying that, you know, part of the reason why, you know, these Floyd rebellions are happening and there are so many, you know, white young faces is that the neoliberals fucked up and created the first white proletariat. Now, it's yet to be seen whether or not this racial solidarity can stay, and whether, you know, we can learn from the mistakes of past movements that Sakai talks about. But I think it is very, I never really thought about that, because millennials and Gen Z weren't, you know, given the same bribe from the extracted wealth of the real proletariat, which are the internally colonized peoples in the United
Right.
States.
And I just wanted to comment that.
And how that really does
Oh,
explain
sorry.
a lot, because the poorer you are, the easier it is for you to, you know, become class conscious. And even if it's only, you know, like half conscious at this point,
Right. And I just wanted
It,
I wanted to interject real quick, which is that, you know, economic disfranchisement, I think, can have, a consciousness raising effect. But like, as we're kind of gleaning from our reading of the German Revolution here, is that frequently, economic destitution and difficulty leads to, uh, you know, radicalization for some, but like it's tremendously demoralizing. And I think
yeah,
that having the importance of building revolutionary organization is to be able to kind of get people in the long run to kind of keep their chins up and keep fighting, um, right?
exactly.
And like
The
furthermore,
re
I think
Oh,
the other
sorry,
thing that's
continue.
really important to glean from our study of the German Revolution, and to also tie it to this discussion of, historically privileged class, um, which is, what happens when a historically privileged class is threatened with proletarianization, which I think historically in the US has brought out the fascistic
They
tendencies
turn to reaction. Yeah.
repeatedly. And we're definitely, I think, seeing that now with the rise of, various, fascist or semi fascist, street gangs and that sort of thing in the US.
Yeah, we got a modern day Freikorps, or
Well,
Freikorps wannabes, at
yeah,
least.
yeah, I'd say like if there's anything that's any like the Freikorps, I'd say it's probably like the Three Percenters or something. Because they're like, aren't they
Oh,
like,
did you see Sacha Baron Cohen actually
oh yeah,
performed,
trolling them?
actually
That
went
was
undercover
pretty.
and
That
and
was quite
trolled
a
the 3%?
stunt.
Oh, yeah.
What was that? The Sacha Baron Cohen
Oh,
thing?
I need to oh,
It's an ordeal.
so
I'm
funny.
actually not
Oh
sure
yeah,
that I
I
want
mean,
to cover that right now. Like, sorry, I don't
yeah,
mean to
we don't need to worry about that. But
I
yeah,
don't mean to
Freikorps is
Okay,
much
like
fun.
maybe post
wow.
a link in the chat or
No,
something,
that's
but I would
totally
rather
fine.
skip over that for now if you don't mind.
Okay.
It's
That
not
is totally
it
fine.
is interesting, but it's a little too tangential, I think.
Agreed.
It's quite a spectacle for sure. Um Also, I want to, be respectful of everyone's time here, both my co-hosts and my own, because I'm starting to get the rumblies for some dinner here. And I want to respect the time of my lovely chat. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Uh, I think I would like to kind of start wrapping things up. But we can kind of have a look forward to what we're going to be covering next time. Next time, we're going to be going through chapters 35 through 38. So that's starting, if you have a link to the book, which if you don't have it yet, please get in touch with me on Twitter. I'll make sure you have a link to it. I'm going to post a link to it.
Oh,
Um,
everyone in my Discord, check the stream chat, text chat, and the PDF version of the book is in there.
yeah, so I just posted a PDF of the book in chat. Unfortunately, the PDF is not properly indexed, so you will have to kind of fish around for the right page. Sorry about that. It's just kind of a limitation of pirating books off the internet. Not that I condone such things. uh, don't deplatform me, YouTube, please. Um, but that will be starting on page 685, going all the way to chapter 38. Oh boy. Oh, this is a long section. Uh, 685 to 753. Oh lordy, that is a chunk of a section. Oh well. We get through it. There's typically at least four of us cracking on this, and hopefully next time we'll be back in 2 weeks. So that's let's see, that'll be July 12th at 3:30 Pacific, 6:30 Eastern time. And yeah, if you enjoyed this, consider, I'm going to put up the splash for my to ask you to please support the show if you really liked seeing what you came here today and engaged with. If this is something that you value, that you want to help support, head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/aworldtowin. I put out.
Can you put that in the group DM so I can put into my chat?
Yeah, I will. But yeah, the the show is totally viewer funded. I don't. I'm just a working scientist. I don't make a huge amount of money, so this is something that I do as a side habit. I'm still very passionate about it, of course, but I only have so much time to devote to this. But your funds help keep the show going and help me, keep coming back for more. So let me just post a link in the chat. Yeah, so I've got that going on. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
Oh wait, I'm
what's up?
continuing. I'm gonna be continuing on my own stream.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm just ending my stream on YouTube, so
Oh
you
shit, I'm sorry.
you can do whatever you want.
Bye, chat.
All right.